Did we get it? Are we there? Hey there, friends. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. This is another C# with CSharpFritz episode. And we're going to talk about C#. We're going to get you invested in the programming language. We're going to learn a little bit more about it. And for beginners, we're going to get you started. We're restarting a cycle here. About a year ago, we started this series right here on the Visual Studio channel on Twitch. We're also going to be broadcasting over on YouTube and on Learn TV. I've got monitors open for all three, and we're keeping track of chat messages, and we want to answer your questions as they come in, as we discuss and we learn a new programming language for many folks. We want to get folks comfortable and interested in the C# programming language and what you can do with it with .NET. There are so many cool things that you can do with this programming language. It's really been built to be that Swiss Army knife, to be that tool that goes anywhere. Maybe Swiss Army knife is the wrong thing. To be built to be like duct tape. You can just take it and use it anywhere, everywhere, and it's going to help you build applications, build things that are going to help you be happy with the applications, with the tools, the games that you want to be involved with. I'm bringing up Pubble over here so we can take a look at Learn TV. Let me say hello to some of the folks over there in the chat room. I've got it up over here. Okay, maybe it's not over there. We'll go back to the city. But I do see over there a whole bunch of folks from YouTube. Nitro Evil is here over on Twitch. Chris Jones is on Twitch as well. Coffee Rants, good afternoon to you in Northeast England, not New England. Shadrach is here from Ghana. I'm sorry, I can't quite read your name there, saying hello world. Obina Okafor, hello to you in the East. A priest walks into a tavern. Cringe, why cringe? Taipan, hello to you in Thailand. Vortex is here. Good morning. Henry WASD says Vim is greater than. Vim's a fine editor, but Vim's a text editor. Folks can be really productive and do some really cool things with your choice of Visual Studio tools, whether it's Visual Studio, choose a year, 2015, 2017, 2019, the upcoming Visual Studio 2022, Visual Studio for Mac, or Visual Studio Code, the most popular code editor in the world. You're going to be productive with .NET on any of those. Really great stuff that when folks when they dip a toe in it, if they're not using it, wait do you see what you're missing. You're gonna it's a really great code editing tool because it's more than just an editor. Do the glasses work? Asks Mercal94. Yes. So I do wear Gunnar glasses when I'm coding. These help reduce blue light. I've been diagnosed with some other optical problems, and for me, they certainly help me keep focus and extend my working day when I can be focused and reading and writing code on a display. Thank you, Rambling Geek. I had for the well wishes. I had a weekend away visiting with family over the weekend, and we took the kids to go see Washington, D.C., my daughters. It was a very nice weekend. A little disappointing due to the state of COVID and some of the things going on in the country, a lot in the States, that is. Not too many things were open, but it was nice to see the sites and get into a couple of museums. So, how are you doing there? Paul in Australia. Ruben says, cool hat. This is a hat that was given to me a couple years ago from the folks at Xamarin University, who now run a bit of Learn TV and some of the and Microsoft Learn, but it shows not only can you use, it's over on this side, you can use C# for the cloud in Visual Studio. You can use it to make websites and other things with angle brackets and mobile apps. You can use C# everywhere, and we'll talk more about that. So, CSharpFritz fan. Well, thank you. I'm nice to see somebody created that YouTube account. Hello to you in Ukraine, Argentina, and Turkey. In the Middle East. Oh, well, that's fantastic. I'm glad you're tuned in. You feel like you've got the basics of the language, says a priest walks into a tavern. And while I'm looking through the documentation, just unsure of where to go after that. Well, after you learn the language, we can talk about this briefly. And please, the AMA is we are very much in an AMA mode here. I want you to feel comfortable asking questions about .NET, about the programming language. I'm happy to answer them. This is a discussion session. This isn't Fritz goes and gives a lecture. This is, let's have a discussion. Let's make sure that you're comfortable with the programming language. Answer some of those things that may be stopping you from getting started. Get you pointed to some good material to help you get over that block, get past that bump in the road so that you can be successful as a programmer, as a software developer, as somebody who wants to be productive building applications. So where do you go after reading some of the documentation about C#? The next step is to get involved with one of the programming frameworks that you're going to use with that. So with many programming languages out there, you're going to learn the basics of how to put things together, how to structure your code, and how to interact with various data types. But then you need to figure out what types of things do you want to build with your newfound programming language knowledge. Where are you going to take that? Or do you want to build websites? Do you want to build IoT things, Internet of Things things? That sounds weird. Internet of Things things. But right, small devices that connect out to the internet and interact, provide some sort of a service. Do you want to build desktop applications? Do you want to write games? Mobile applications? All kinds of different things you could do with your newfound programming knowledge. Well, let's figure out where and how you want to go there and choose an appropriate framework that's going to allow you to use that language, that tool set, to build appropriately. And .NET, specifically with the C# programming language, you can take that knowledge and go anywhere, any type of application, games, internet applications. You want to build things that work in virtual reality? Cool. We've got support for that. You want to build things that run on Windows? Of course, we've got support for that. Lots of great options. So figure out where you're moved, and you can go and learn more in that direction. Let me see here. It is important to have rest time for your eyes. Blink more often. Absolutely. Emmanuel, good afternoon to you in Zimbabwe. Hoi Nguyen, hello. Good afternoon to Abubakar in West Africa. Hello. Johnny B. Cat is here. Rick76 says VS Code is best in slot. More folks use Visual Studio Code than any other code editor in the world. Hello to you, Learn with Code in Malaysia. Notepad is certainly a very popular text editor as well. Let me see here. Good morning, Leap Geek. How much did the glasses go for? You can go out to gunner.com and you can get a pair anywhere from $25 American to $200 American, depending on how fancy you want to get it, or if you need prescription in there. All kinds of stuff. More information and a link to a coupon over on my Twitch channel if you're interested in that. Could I explain the difference between just-in-time and ahead-of-time compilers? We'll get into that, absolutely. Let me bookmark and come back to that question. Why not use ahead of time if it's faster? We'll get back to that. Absolutely, I'll be happy to answer that. Good morning to David in Prague. Can I run a couple of servers in a test scenario? Absolutely. So they're mocking dependencies, for an example, but need to mock my clients. So Casper, looking to run servers to run a test scenario. So getting a little bit further ahead, but when folks want to build tests to test out a scenario with their applications, you'll see them remove some of those dependencies like servers and move into using something called mocks or stubs, where they'll bring in appropriate shaped objects in the programming language so that it mimics what a test server or a server might respond to them, or even what a database might respond with, because the database is going to change. The files on disk are going to change. The state of the network is going to change. So for the purposes of writing unit tests, you'll see folks write code that is that doesn't depend on those things. In fact, some folks will go so far as to stub out, provide a mock object for working with time so that they can get a fixed period of time when they run their tests. So at the point where you get past that unit test and you want to test to make sure that your application works with real servers, you're getting into more of an integration test at that point, is what we call it. And that integration test is really now starting to see what happens when you connect to these other dependencies. What happens when you connect to a real database? What happens when you connect out to that microservice and interact with it? You can certainly stand up those test servers for that. Absolutely. Don't let me tell you not to. But you're starting to increase the complexity of your testing situation, which is something that in complex applications and systems you're going to want. But take your time getting there. Make sure you get the basics working, your units working, before you start introducing more complexity and more dependencies. The difference between Stranger, another person asking about just-in-time and ahead of time, and you're asking exactly the same question as somebody above. So that sure looks like we've got somebody trying to troll us here. So I think I may pass on that question because I've got the same person asking the same questions with multiple accounts. Can we devote a stream to ml.net? I think that's something I was talking to some folks about, and we can talk about getting to that definitely after this series. There's more to be discussed there. Siraj, hello to you in India. Stuart Bradley in Blackpool in the UK. Is that Zhao in Brazil? Am I reading Twitch or YouTube chat? I'm reading both. John Warwick. Let's see here. Swapped recently from Sublime to Visual Studio. My local server loading has increased significantly. You're changing editor and your server. How does that? I don't understand how you changed your code editor and your service is taking that your code is different. Changing your code editor is not going to change how your production application and production system runs. So I'm not sure. There's something else going on there. That's not your editor. How do unit tests really help businesses to run? Unit tests are, gosh, how can I break this down a little bit? Unit tests make sure that a small unit of your code works properly. So you'll have some business logic you'll write into a segment of code that applies some algorithm, runs some creates some business value for you. You're going to write a unit test that makes sure that that behaves the way that your specification says to. In this way, when you run your builds, when you compile your application, you have the option then to run those unit tests as much as you want. And they should always come back true, passed, successful, in which case you've now created a automated test that's a marker that indicates this always works the same way. Consequently, if at some point in the future you're in and tinkering around that logic and you need to enhance it, you want to make it run faster, differently, well, you can make those changes and you have the assurance, because you have that unit test that doesn't change, that you don't modify, that it still behaves, it still delivers the same value. In this way, now you have effectively an insurance policy that that automated test still indicates that your code delivers the same value. It's a very important thing to have those automated tests when we have less human interaction with our test environments, less quality assurance folks. Consequently, then, you can start to have then large arrays, large collections of these tests that run automatically every time you build or every night. We call this continuous integration. And that continuous integration means that everything that you've declared, those requirements that you now have tests that enforce work the way that you want them to, will still work the same way when you deploy to production. So it gives you that insurance policy, that assurance that it works the way specified. You do 3-layer programming in JavaScript, build using mock data, and you integrate the API. Oh, fantastic. That's great, Fordorth. John Warwick has a Visual Studio app built in .NET, secure and strong enough for a web app. Handling financial data? Yes, I've built several in my time before joining Microsoft. Continuing scrolling here, what is a REST API? That we covered that in a different session. Quite simply, it's an HTTP endpoint that allows you to communicate, get data from it, send data to it, interact with it, and it does something on a server with that data, with that logic. What are we covering today? Asks Hustle over on Twitch. We're going to be talking about the basics of C# today. Can I learn .NET by myself? You sure can, but I'm here to help you if you have some questions. Hello to you, Wayne in South Africa. Can I dive a bit more on the framework types? We'll be doing that a little bit here. Abubakar, absolutely. What's the difference between task run, task factory, start new? That's a bit too advanced for the discussion today. I'm sorry, but I'm going to pass on that. Drop me the question on Twitter and we'll move on. We're about 20 minutes in. I'm happy to do a little bit of AMA here, but that's a little bit advanced for where I want to discuss. Let's see here. A lot of folks talking about what TDD is. Unit testing. There you go. Caparino, what do I think of all types of tests are important? Yes, they are. You hear a lot about unit tests, but not for functional integration. Absolutely. Especially integration tests as the scale. So there's different types of tests. Integration tests are at the far end of the testing spectrum. Unit tests a small bit of your application. Integration tests are at the far end that test almost a duplicate of your entire system. With all the pieces, test instances of all of those pieces of your system to make sure that it works and that all of those pieces collaborate together and work properly. It's much more complicated to manage and deploy those. Folks have simplified that by using containers, tools like Kubernetes to help manage and deploy all of those instances. You'll also see that when we get to integration tests, if your application passes all the tests prior to it and it gets to an integration test, a lot more things can go wrong out there. And we start to look at resiliency of the interactions between those systems. It is a complete science to itself, and it's something where it can actually get quite expensive to manage. Where unit testing, the cost to manage it is quite minimal. Is this on YouTube as well? Yes. YouTube.com/.net is where we are over there. Do large projects use a different type of tests? Integration tests is what you'll see from various large projects that turn into systems. Unit tests should not include database dependencies. That's correct. Stuart asks that over in YouTube. Let me see here. Dipping your toes into building a specialized calculator for your company. All the formulas and such are already built and running in AppSheet as a prototype. Oh, that's cool, Drew. All right. You're going to head making something that can be loaded fast, used by clients with multiple calculation sessions. Is that looking into Xamarin to build out the interface? Is that the right direction to go? Yes, Xamarin, it will be supported for at least another year after .NET 6. But we're setting up so that you have a nice migration pattern into .NET MAUI and .NET 6 when that's released in November. .NET Conf was announced. You'll hear more about .NET Conf the second week of November 2021. We'll be launching .NET 6 as part of that event. Hello, Victor in Romania. Can I explain how a C# project should be structured? We'll get into C# project structure in a couple of sessions. If you'd like, the videos from this series are all available on YouTube. You can go and check out other episodes there where I do talk further about it. And all of the content for these sessions you can find on GitHub, github.com/C#Fritz/C#_with_C#Fritz. We'll take a look at the GitHub repository in just a minute. Let me finish going through and catching up on the various questions and things that we have here. So glad to see so many folks joining us this morning East Coast time here where I am on the States. Mr. Noted has a .NET ASPX web document approval system in C# that's been running for at least 10 years. Awesome. That's great to hear. Can we run Python scripts in C#? There was a tool for it, but it's since no longer really supported, called Iron Python. So we don't recommend it. Your Python code will look actually a lot like C# code, look a lot like F# code. You might be able to transition and get into F# a little bit easier. What is shift left testing? Never heard of it. Wagoning. Is Visual Studio 2021 released? No. Visual Studio 2022 is the next version. It is in preview. It is in public preview. You can download and you can check it out. Everybody can get access to that. Vladimir asks, is in the future, C# will it be better for JavaScript than JavaScript for web development? Time will tell, depending on how WebAssembly support for the browser improves, changes, shifts, how the browser vendors move to support that. So more about that later. Not later, but more as time goes on here. All right, let me head over. I want to show you the GitHub repository. I want to get some music playing here in the background. Yeah, get moving. Let's get moving on to the topics and things here. This is Stream Beats from Harris Heller. There it is. This is the Stream Beats Lo-Fi playlist. We're playing this. We have some groovy music in the background that we can listen to and have a good time writing code and just kind of chill and relax together. Check it out. There are playlists for you for Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify, as well as all the music you can download from streambeats.com. Thank you so much to Harris Heller for making this music available for us to listen to today. All right. Will C#6 support text to voice out of the box? No. You'll see a plugin that bounces off of Azure to do that. In fact, you can do that now. Text to voice out of the box. You can do that now with Azure. Defer and bring in that type of feature. All right, let me head over. Let's show you the GitHub repository. It's right there. This is CSharpFritz / C# with CSharpFritz. All the sessions we're going to be going through are available here. And I will share the link to both Twitch and YouTube right there. You can click through and get access to. We're going to go through Notebook 1 today as we kick off and we dig into things that we can get started with C#. And this is, once again, beginners very much welcome. We're going to talk about the basics and get you successful with .NET, with C# here. Let me do this here real quick. Give me one more click. There we go. All right. So you're going to find over here, I have .NET interactive notebooks. These are Jupyter notebooks that instead of connecting and using Python, they use .NET, a tool called .NET Interactive. You can click through here where it says Launch Binder if you want to run these samples in your browser. You can clone this repository and run it locally. We're going to be in the Notebooks folder here, and we're going to be particularly working with first session 1 here. I just added some information about tuples to it, a couple other bits of documentation in here. Were updated so we can talk about .NET 6. We can talk about C# 9 as part of this, and we're going to get you started, get you pointed in the right direction for folks that want to learn C#. Yes, the IPYNB extension. What in the world is that? That is a Python notebook, interactive Python notebook. So, but otherwise known as a Jupyter notebook. But all the tools to run those notebooks are available in Visual Studio Code when you download and open it up. So, open Visual Studio Code for the first time, and when you open one of these documents, Visual Studio Code will go and download and install the appropriate extensions for you, so that you can interact with them and start checking out how to program with this. So I'll show you here how to launch Binder. So clicking Launch Binder will build a Docker container here, so that you can do all of these samples right in your browser. So it doesn't matter if you're on Windows, Mac, or Linux. If you're on a tablet, maybe you're on a Chromebook, maybe you're on an iPad, maybe you're on a Google Pixel, whatever it might be, you can click through to Binder here, and you're going to be able to follow along with these samples as I talk about them today. There's links to documentation inside the notebooks. There's running code that you're going to be able to run inside these notebooks that I want you to tinker with. I want you to write your own code in there, try different things, try to break it. It's okay. You're not going to break anything. Your machine's not going to crash. Your tablet's not going to fail on you. You can even run this on your phone if you'd like. So you're going to click into first session IPYNB, and you're going to get this content. I wrote a whole bunch of text here that describes what's going on, how we interact with these things, and there are code samples in here that you'll be able to execute in the browser. All right. Now, I don't want to sit here and talk through and point at this. I want to head over and actually walk into the code and stand next to this. So I'm going to grab my stuff here, and we're going to head over to the other system. Head over to the big green screen. There it is. Am I on that? I'm on the other. Fantastic. This is what happens when you have too many microphones. We're going to head over to the other screen so we can talk about types, keywords, and operators in C#. Yeah, we're using notebooks and Binder. You can do this in Visual Studio Code, and that's where I'm going to be for the rest of the session, but I want to make sure that you see that you can jump in here, and there's all these links out to official documentation if you want to learn more about that. And we've got our C# code down here a little bit further. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but let me head over to the full set so we can use the green screen and talk about this. All right, let me head over there. All right. So, see that? It's Visual Studio Code. Oh no! My headset cable got caught. All right, there we are. So it's Visual Studio Code. It's the exact same content, but we've got it on the green screen here so we can talk about and walk through this. I've got it here on my Surface Book in front of me, so we can talk about all the content, all the things that you want to learn about that to get you started with C#. So I mentioned earlier, you can use C# in a bunch of different places. There's my GitHub repository. If we go to .net, .net, free cross-platform open source, a developer platform for building all your apps. Anywhere you want to be. Supported on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. So, look at all the different types of applications you can build. Me, I'm a web developer first. I love building web applications. I want to learn more. I'm going to spend time over the next few months learning how to build mobile applications. That's where I'm going to spend time making myself better. Microservices, of course, you want to build all kinds of little services that interact with each other to deliver a larger system. Microservices. Machine learning, somebody mentioned earlier, ML.net. Yes, you can do machine learning here. Desktop applications, of course. .NET is kind of born out of building things for the Windows desktop operating system. So absolutely. Build for the cloud. Build games. There's all kinds of really cool games that you might be playing that were built with C#. They were built with .NET. Internet of Things, I mentioned that a little bit ago. You can build all kinds of little apps and things that work with Raspberry Pi, other single board computers. We've been working with a tower of Raspberry Pi computers over on my other channel. Tune in there if you want to see a little bit more of some of the things that we're doing there. Really, really fun stuff to tinker with and learn. How long will the stream go for? We go for about 2 hours, so about another hour and a half we'll be here. Am I going to try Maui for the mobile apps? Harrison, we're going to be working with Maui on this channel as part of this series. When we get out into December, we'll start tinkering with Maui. That way it's released, it's production ready. I don't like to, as part of this series of streams, I don't like to use preview tools and things because quite frankly, they can change. And these sessions, these videos, I want to make sure last a long time, that they're available for folks to tune in and the content is still relevant. So I want to make sure that on supported versions of .NET tools and Visual Studio, we are using those currently supported things and not things that are in preview. I experiment with preview versions of things over on my Twitch channel if you want to see more about that. And you'll also see on the Visual Studio channel, the .NET channel on YouTube, Visual Studio on Twitch, .NET on YouTube, you'll see the .NET teams, they'll hold stand-up, they call it a stand-up show, where it's just like in lean software development practices, they'll have a weekly discussion with you, a panel discussion, talking about new features, things that they're tinkering with, things that they're experimenting with, to figure out if it's the best and appropriate ways to evolve the programming language, the tools, to meet your needs. Mr. Gunn makes games with C# and the Mono game framework, and that's been cool. Oh, that's great. Glad to hear it, Mr. Gunn. Glad that you're finding that productive. Do I prefer the Surface Book over a Surface laptop? I've never used a Surface laptop. If I buy a book now, is a new model likely to come out soon? I don't have insight into the Surface team and their release schedule. That being said, if you look at previous years' release schedules, a lot of companies like to release new hardware going into September, going into October. So it's you can always wait, and there might be a new version of things coming out 3-4 weeks later. How soon a new version comes out relative to when you purchase your hardware is a risk that we all take. So, all right. Cool. So, now I mentioned C# and .NET kind of intermixed here. Why? Let me head back over here. So, C#, let me zoom in here. C# is a statically typed compiled object-oriented language that's used by the .NET frameworks and runtimes. The official Microsoft C# language reference can be found on docs.microsoft.com. It's similar to Java in syntax and structure. C# programs are compiled and executed against a .NET runtime running on a computer. The output of compiling C# code can be called a .NET program. So what does this mean? This means that you compile, you build your application, you write your C# code, and it needs to live on top of some other code that is going to take the output of your program and translate it so that the computer knows how to execute those instructions you gave it. And that layer that your program sits on top of is called a .NET runtime. A .NET runtime is a collection of commands native to the computer operating system that instruct the computer how to interpret and run the program. So, when Java was released, when .NET was initially released, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this very, very bold move to create just-in-time compiled applications, JIT. You'll see abbreviated. Now, just-in-time compiled applications means that we're going to build our code such that it works on top of this runtime, but it's not completely compiled and ready to run on that runtime. You'll hear it sometimes referred to as bytecode, or IL code, intermediate language code. And that means that you can take that code to any number of different machines, processor architectures, and the .NET runtime will then turn it into the appropriate instruction set for that processor, for that machine. This works fantastic when we talk about Windows, Mac, and Linux. We talk about 64-bit processors using Intel's architecture, AMD's architecture, 32-bit processors. You wrote one block of code, you compile it once, and there's an appropriate runtime for those different machines that is installed and maintained and is able to compile and run your code. That's fantastic, but what happens when we get to things like mobile devices, IoT devices, these small devices? Well, then we need to do ahead-of-time compilation, which is more akin to what you did before just-in-time. I wrote my C# code, now I'm going to compile it with everything I need for this type of processor, for this type of operating system. You're putting all the instructions for that entire prescribed computer that you want your application running on. It then knows and is optimized to run on just that instance. However, the size of your application, because it now contains all the instructions appropriate for that machine, is now larger. It'll start up faster because it doesn't have to do that just-in-time compile when it arrives on the machine and merge in the appropriate bits to connect to and work with that processor, with that architecture, with that operating system. Instead, it has everything and it knows how to start quickly. Okay, that's fine. That's the trade-off between the two. The flexibility in the application you build running on all kinds of different machines, or you build and structure it so that it works for a small subset. and you deploy and maintain multiple instances of your application so that it can run on different operating systems. It can run on different processor architectures. So consequently, when we want to build for an iPhone, we want to build for an Android device, we want to build for a Raspberry Pi, you need to do ahead of time compilation because the .NET Runtime doesn't run on a phone. It doesn't run natively on a single circuit board Internet of Things device. You need to compile it all the way down ahead of time, specific for that machine. I see a bunch of questions and comments in chat. I'm going to come to that in just a second. So that's the trade-off that you get in the flexibility that you have when you build with C#. You get to choose how you want to build, how you want to deploy, and what makes the most sense for your application, for your target environment that you want to interact with. Having all that choice, while it might seem daunting, is an incredibly powerful set of business decisions that you can make so that you can deliver the best app, the best environment, the best experience for your customers, for the folks that are going to use your applications, play your games, interact with your services. So make sure that you don't get lost in that, and deploying and how we do those things to get it running on all those different operating systems, configuration for deployment. We're going to talk about that later in the series. You hope you get to see me at CodePalooza. I will be presenting virtually for CodePalooza later this week. Yes. Write once, run everywhere. That's a great way to describe it, Paul. Absolutely. Write your application once, run it everywhere. Let me see here. Compliments on my voice. Well, thank you, friends. I'm glad you enjoy that. Here, a question coming in from Drew over on YouTube. In other words, the runtime is like translating the meaning of your code to other technologies, like talking between German, English, and Russian, and all getting to the same point. That's not a bad way to put it. Absolutely. I'm providing some pictographs, not quite hieroglyphics, but some pictographs to convey a high-level concept. Folks who understand those pictographs and also understand English, German, Russian, Spanish, what have you, are able to take those pictographs and translate it appropriately and disseminate to those language-speaking communities. Yes, very similar in concept. So we get to take advantage of that by building various runtimes that support the different operating systems and processors that are available to us. ARM64? Absolutely. We've got that covered. AMD 64? Absolutely. We can do that. Intel processors? For sure, we can do that. Apple and the Apple Silicon devices? Yes, we can build and run applications there as well. So lots of great flexibility for you as a C# developer. Pictographs like the signage in airports, absolutely, or some of the signage we saw from the just completed Olympics. So, right, different folks in different parts of the world speak different languages. They use different character sets. Gosh, I remember the first time I stepped off a plane in Sofia, Bulgaria. I can't read Cyrillic text that were on those signs, but there happened to be some English around, and there were other signs for things like, well, the restroom, the water closet. Those signs are pretty universal. Able to find those. Where a telephone was, pretty universal sign that I was able to pick up and follow along, and I was able to navigate relatively well. Relatively. Can I compile C# to a native operating system so that it can run without the CLR? Yes, you can, Deepak. There are tools to do that come with .NET that you can install and run, and you will find it'll deliver a slightly larger application, like I mentioned, but it will start and run faster, initially at least. Do I know if the iOS Office apps are built in C#? I do not know that. Nitro Evil. Cypher. What about the backend? Examples I gave are mainly front end. No, actually, I didn't specify anything about front-end applications or back-end applications. Server applications, you can build and compile and run on any operating system you'd like. The fact that it's Apple Silicon or AMD or ARM64 didn't specify that that was a server or desktop application. And as a longtime web developer that's used, in my experience as a longtime web developer that's used .NET, it'll compile and run very, very fast on server hardware. Yes, indeed. You'll see a startup time, but once it's compiled and running in memory, you're going to be in great shape. Tools to manage dependencies in .NET. We have tools that are available, including our NuGet package manager that you can use to manage those dependencies and references. Is C# sufficient to be a full stack dev? Oh, very much so. There are millions of .NET developers out there, C# developers out there that are very successful, and many enterprises, small companies, startups use .NET and are very successful. Dependency injection is a little bit more complex topic. We'll get into that in another stream. So let me get back in and let's talk more over here as I've reached the end of the questions for right now. So there are several .NET runtimes available that give C# flexibility to run on all these different devices. So come on, you're going to scroll up and give me... Can you give me somewhere in between there? Yeah, there we go. So we have .NET Framework. That's the original version of .NET that shipped only on Windows. Supported building desktop applications, console, and server development. Windows server development. .NET Core was the version, the next evolution of .NET Framework that was built that runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux with support for desktop user interface, console, and server development. And that's been evolved to now just .NET, the one .NET. That includes Xamarin. Xamarin, we'll get to the other two. Xamarin was a version of .NET that was built that runs on iOS, Android, a bunch of other operating systems as well, that has support for native application development on those various devices. Unity, you've probably seen Unity. A number of games, very popular games, are written with Unity, but it runs on Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android devices with support for game development using the Unity 3D toolset. So games like Fall Guys, games like Pokemon Go, Hearthstone are built with Unity, and it's all C# running on your systems. Mono is a version of .NET that was built in kind of a clean room environment based solely off of the specifications of .NET, of C#, that was built to run across Windows, Mac, Linux, and even WebAssembly. Mono has, for the most part, been merged into .NET Core. There are the capabilities of Mono has been merged into .NET Core. There are versions of Mono still available out there that are being maintained and evolving because it is an open source implementation of .NET. But our goal is to get everybody under one umbrella, under one roof, so that we're all using a similar .NET that everybody can use everywhere. A similar runtime, series of runtimes that deploy and run in these various operating systems and chipsets. Taking a look back here at chat. Why would you use .NET Framework while stuff like .NET 5 exist? .NET Framework would be used because there's older applications that are built and being maintained for Windows. Going forward, we at Microsoft, folks at the .NET Foundation, are going to encourage development with .NET 6 starting in November. .NET 5, .NET 6 are going to give you a much better experience building your applications because things run significantly faster in those on those runtimes. There's a bunch of optimizations that have happened in those, and they're all made freely available open source for anybody to see exactly what's going on and how they're built. So folks are able to contribute and make .NET better for everyone. So yes, you can continue building things for .NET Framework, and .NET Framework is very much a part of the Windows operating system. It's a component of Windows. But we encourage you to build with .NET 5, .NET 6. They run on Windows, and you'll have a better experience because that's where we're evolving the .NET ecosystem. Unity games also built from C# to the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 5 also. You're right, Twitch Dog. A bunch of operating systems like that as well. In the past, they've supported Nintendo Wii, Nintendo Wii U, several of the PlayStation versions. Very, very cool stuff that you can do with Unity. Xbox as well, I believe. Will .NET Framework disappear? No. .NET Framework is going to continue as part of Windows. Isn't .NET MAUI going to try to simplify the C# stack? It's going to try to simplify the C# stack for building applications. Building desktop and mobile applications as the goal. So, and my friends from the .NET MAUI team, you can see on Twitch, on the Visual Studio channel, on YouTube, on the .NET channel, they have a monthly stand-up discussion where they show new features coming in .NET MAUI, the current state of things, and how you can build your applications with .NET MAUI. All right, so okay, .NET requires a framework. Hey. .NET C# requires a .NET runtime and framework to run. You gonna let me? No, you're not gonna let me scroll that to the top there, are you? And an appropriate program type to run. The definition of the framework and runtime for a C# program are stored in a .csproj file. That project file defines, here's the type of application that I have. Here's the various packages and dependencies that I'm referencing that I need to load. Folks that are coming in from JavaScript, that are working with Node in projects, you have a package.json file that specifies versions and metadata for your application, includes all the references, the package references to download from NPM. Exact same thing, except in XML format in the csproj file. Why XML format? Because in 2001, 2002, when .NET was launched, that was the way that you stored metadata. And in order to provide ultimate backwards compatibility, and that's a theme that you're going to hear again and again and again with .NET development, in order to provide and continue that backwards compatibility, the csproj file format has remained unchanged. It's been enhanced. It's had things added to it that still meet the original standard of those project file file format definitions from way back in 2001. So this 20-year-old format has been updated again and again to give you new features that make it easier to work with and easier for our human eyes to read. Machine might be able to pull out stuff that looks all kinds of garbled and a mess with numbers and hash codes meshed in there, but we've since simplified that to make it easier for our human eyes to read. We're not going to talk further about CS project files today. We're going to get in and talk about the language C# today and get folks hopefully successful about some of those things. Your C# files that you write and save to disk, they carry a .cs file extension by default. You can point to and tell it to go build and reference files with a different file extension. But if you use the .cs file extension, a bunch of the .NET tooling is going to light up and just work for you. So use the .cs extension unless you have a really good reason not to. So we're going to talk about the language. We're going to work through some of those language capabilities that you might put into a .cs file inside this notebook. There are code elements inside this notebook that this .NET notebook that we see back here in Visual Studio Code, that are going to execute live in the browser, in the editor for us. We'll talk about how to assemble those into larger pieces another time. We're going to focus, though, on types and some syntax today. Let me take a look back over at chat and see if I can catch up. Wow, that is really I'm sorry. Jaya Kumar, that is way advanced for today's discussion, talking about task-based asynchronous patterns and styles to access database. That's outside of today's discussion. If you had an application built with .NET MAUI, how could I get a user working across multiple devices and still have access to the data? Asks Vortex. Topic for that's way beyond what we're discussing today. My apologies, but I'm not going there right now. Maybe enter Zen mode. Then it's in the middle. I want it over on the right side. So, how do I get out of here? There we go. I prefer it to be on the right side. If anything, I would turn off the bits at the top so that it moves over a little bit. But even then, okay. Syntax 101, the very basics, right? I wonder how many folks really still get the 101 reference. So when we talk about C# syntax, some basics that make it different, make it unique from other programming languages. All statements in C# end with a semicolon. Now, there are other structures that you'll create in C#, but when you write a statement, some piece of code that's doing some interaction, that's analyzing something, you're going to end that statement with a semicolon. It is a hard and fast rule, not like in JavaScript. I know some folks will say, oh, that's kind of like JavaScript. In JavaScript, you don't always have to end with a semicolon. There's ways around that. It's a little bit tricky, and there's two sides to that discussion. In C# always ends with a semicolon. C# is not space sensitive. Place as many spaces, tabs, blank lines around the code as you'd like. Those white space characters, we know they're there for you to be able to communicate to other humans what's going on in your application, what's going on in your source code, in your program. That's important to you, and we want to make sure that you can maintain and use those. The compiler will come through later and turn that code and get rid of the spaces and turn that into language, into content, into binary content that the processor is able to work with, the computer processor can work with. So the spaces, the text, how the case of the code that you write doesn't matter for declaring variables for where you place content. That's up to you, and use what makes you happy so that you can communicate to other humans what your program does. It is case sensitive, so variables, objects, and their interactions must be referenced with the proper casing. It does scroll a little bit too much here. There you go, proper casing. And that's okay. This means you can declare variables called me, lowercase m, lowercase e, or me, all capitals, capital M, capital E, and those are two different variables. You can interact with them uniquely from each other. That's not bad. Okay, I can understand that and I can follow that. And the tools, Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, plugins, Visual Studio for Mac, plugins for various other text editors if you want to work in Vim, Emacs, Sublime, choose your favorite text editor, are going to help you find those variables, maintain your case sensitivity, and continue to be productive and successful. Comments in C# are very similar to JavaScript syntax, where it starts with 2 slashes, will give you 1 line of comment. Whatever's after those 2 slashes is commented out. Whatever's before those 2 slashes are live executable code. You can also surround a block a series of multiple lines with /* fencing, this is called. And any code on the lines between that star and that slash is all commented out. And you see that the notebook is indicating to me that that's commented out, just like the line above it, by placing it in this green font, this green color for the font. Okay, so and I realize that for those of you out there that may be listening to this stream, maybe listening to this video because you are vision impaired, the code, what is it? Reader, I believe it's called, will read and indicate to you when these are commented. So for those of us that are able to see the code, it is in green and you are able to see these things. We want to make sure that our tools, Microsoft wants to make sure that the tools that you use to write code are accessible to you, even if you can't see the code. That's important. And I also try to make sure that as I'm describing, as I'm showing code here and I'm talking through it, I hope that you appreciate I am sometimes a little bit overly descriptive of the code, so that those folks who might be walking the dog and not watching, but also those folks who and folks who are driving or wherever and they're not able to watch, but also those folks who can't physically see the video, they can participate as well, and they can learn to be successful with their application writing with C#. Let me take a look back at chat real quick. Why not rename it to Syntax Basics? I could, sure. GBHWM in Twitch says, I'm not up to date with the unification of .NET Framework and .NET Core for desktop. Is it still possible to develop desktop applications using old frameworks like WinForms and WPF? You will be able to continue to develop with those frameworks on .NET Framework, and they've been migrated and updated on .NET Core, now .NET 5, .NET 6. In the new versions of those tools, those frameworks, WinForms and WPF, they've been updated so that they can handle high DPI displays, so that they process, read data, interact with the Windows operating system much, much faster. So really great stuff that you're going to be able to take advantage of when you migrate your applications from .NET Framework to .NET, hopefully .NET 6. Any good quick reference PDFs that I reference about what? What's the max length of a variable? What do you mean by a max length of a variable? Maximum length of a variable name? Don't think there is one, yeah. It might be 32,000 characters. But at that point, what are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish? I mean, there does come a point where as you name a variable, and we'll get into variable naming here in just a second, you're naming a variable so that you can describe something for another programmer, for another developer to be able to read. If you put the entire text of I'm trying to think of an example that would be internationally funny here. If you were to put the entire text of oh my goodness. If you were to put the entire text of a BTS song as the name of a variable, I don't think that's doing what you want to accomplish. Right? If you're putting if this was an American-only audience, I would say if you put the entire text of the Declaration of Independence as a variable name, what's that doing for you? That's not doing anything interesting. So, all right. C# syntax reference. No, I don't know of a PDF off the top of my head. All of the documentation is linked up here, up at the top. The official C# language reference is right there. You can click through and check that out. And this notebook is linked in the sample just below the video on YouTube. All right. So, let me see. Yeah, put the B movie script in there. Sure. Let me see here. Don't use emoji naming conventions. In fact, I think the C# the C# team removed emojis. They're not valid valid parts of a variable name. Why do I get so many project errors when I name my Visual Studio project with a 0? No, project names that you set up should start with an alpha character, not alphanumeric, but an alpha character, because that's going to turn into the beginning of a file name for the assembly on disk by default. It's also going to be the default namespace, and those two cannot start with a numeric character. So, all right, moving on. Everything in C# is an object. It's an object-oriented programming language. So everything we want to work with is an object. Objects can be declared of various types and then interacted with. And the simplest types in C# in .NET are the built-in types. We can define variables in memory storage for a type, variables which are in memory storage of a type, easy for me to say, by preceding the name of the variable we would like to create with the type of the variable we're creating. And I just outlined right here. Here's all a couple of the different types. I have an integer here. I have a double precision number here. I have a single character here called C. So integer named I, a double precision number, right? So this has a decimal with a series of digits after it, and a character type called C. That's a single character. And I can execute this. Let's change that to display. And nothing was inserted into C, so nothing gets reported here. But I've declared these variable types, and the spacing around them doesn't matter. You can see the vertical lines here to represent the tabs going across for this. That's okay. What makes you happy and makes it easier for you to communicate your intent is what matters. All right. Not very exciting, but when we create a 32-bit integer named I, we can also initialize that variable with an equals assignment at the time of declaration. And I'm seeing that my green screen here is not being completely faded away on me. Darn it, I thought I had that set properly. Let me see here. 1 second. Nah, I'm just going to keep going. We'll be all right. So if I declare integer I equals 10, let me put the word display around this to make it just a little bit more standard. And it reports 10. Okay, so I've declared an integer, and I've said, okay, assign the value 10 to it, display what's in I, and I get reported here by the notebook, 10. Once again, not very interesting, but the very simple interaction of define a variable, assign a value to it, get that value out, and put it on the screen in these 2 lines of code. Going back over to chat, what's going on there? All right, good. So defining something integer I equals 10, having to do that can get a little overwhelming, can get a little repetitive, because if I'm declaring a whole bunch of integers, I can certainly declare many integers with commas to separate them. And now I've also declared the integers j, k, and l. What you'll see many C# developers do is they'll put these on separate lines. Like this. Just to make it extremely clear that these 3 are integers. You can do that. But we've repeated this int keyword multiple times here, and it's kind of annoying. It's repetitive, And quite frankly, we as developers don't like to repeat ourselves. Additionally, when I've declared int I equals 10, well, don't you know that it's an integer because I assigned the value 10? Can't you derive that? So we also have the var keyword. Just like you have the var keyword in JavaScript and other programming languages, we use the var keyword when it's a little cumbersome to assign the value and define and instead of defining on both the left side of the equals, here's the type of this variable, and on the right side of the equals, here's the type of this variable. We can use the var keyword and effectively tell the compiler at compile time, you go figure out what type this is that we're going to assign to this variable. It doesn't matter to me because I'm giving you enough information on the right side of the equal sign here for it to derive, for it to assign that. Now, this is what we like to call syntactic sugar. This isn't something that the compiler is going to run into and slow down your running application because it needs to figure out what type that is. No. At compile time, it's going to look, oh, there's a variable declaration there with var. I know what this thing is on the right side. So the actual instructions that I generate for the processor are the same, whether I use the var keyword or I declare that type explicitly. So when I say things like var I equals 10, and look, I put a whole bunch of spaces in here, that works. And var some really long variable name equals 9, sure, it's going to assign those numeric values. Var foo equals something in quotes here. Well, that's going to create a string. And a string is a collection of characters. It's going to take that string and assign it to foo. And now if I say display some really long variable name, it outputs 9 right there. I'll run that again. And I'll call display here. Notice var c equals single quotes c. That's not declaring a string of c. That's declaring a single character. Okay, a character is a very primitive type. A string is a collection of characters, where a character is a single value, right? A string is a reference to multiple character values. We'll talk about value types and reference types next time. So I can call those and it returns those two values. We can only use the var keyword when creating and assigning the variable in one statement. Very important there. Okay. Now, something that was added as part of C# 9 is, well, let's turn it the other way. Instead of saying var this equals a value that I know, and you could go figure out the type over there on the left side. Instead of, you go figure this out. Let's turn that around and let's declare the type and say, just go give me a new one of those. And have it go figure that out. As of C# 9, which was released as part of .NET 5, so you also have this feature in .NET 6. It is not available in .NET Core or .NET Framework, but in C# 9, .NET 5, and later, you have target-typed new expressions. And I'm going to come to chat in just a second. So these types that are declared, and you can then construct and initialize using the new keyword. You don't have to specify anything about the constructor. Well, you can specify as much as appropriate. If the type can be inferred from its usage, the new keyword can be used. So if we have a list here that we've defined, a list of type string, we'll see more about generics another time, but list of type string called test list, well, I can just say new here. I don't have to include that. And it will create and initialize a new list, and the count of items in my list is 0. If I want to provide some initialization with that, I can. So new, and I pass in strings to initialize my list with hello and world. Now when I run this, I have 2 elements in my list. So I can use the new constructor keyword here instead of specifying. And for more complex types, like a list or some other type that you're going to be defining and creating, this becomes very handy, very efficient to use. And once again, it comes back to giving you the flexibility to declare and build your types in the way that makes you happy. If this communicates your intent better, use it. If you'd rather be very explicit about how you do your interactions, use that. They all only interfere with the compiling process, not the runtime. The runtime runs at the same speed. Let me see, what do we got here? What's the difference between display and console write line? Asks Curious Drive. Display is a specific format, a specific method that's used and available for these .NET notebooks, for Python notebooks. So don't say Python notebooks, for Jupyter notebooks that outputs the content afterwards. Console write line is interpreted the same way. Display does not work outside of the notebook format. Is it more efficient to use int or string rather than var? No. Or text. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. .NET Framework offers 20+ programming language. Why C# something special? C# is the language that millions of .NET developers use. There are other programming languages that compile and run on .NET, but C# is by far the preferred language. Scrolling here. This is so entertaining, even though you already know how to code in C#. Well, thank you. Is it VI or is it Vi? Either way, thank you for stopping in. We'll talk further about some of these topics each week in the weeks ahead. Why am I not using console write line? I could certainly use that, but I'm in a .NET Interactive notebook here. It does the same if you get the capitalization correct. You're not going to run for me, are you? That does the same thing. Display is a little bit easier to use, and when we shift and the notebooks change, and if you want the internal the visualizers of the notebook to take advantage and show you something maybe a little bit more about what it is that you're outputting, display will reference and use those objects. It'll output things. So here, let's do this. If I say console write line test list, it gives me this. What is that? It's the type. It's what happens when you put a toString on that type. But I thought I hit home there. Home. When I change that to display, and instead of display count, now that's the difference between console write line and display. Display sees what the type is, engages an appropriate display formatter, and formats it nicely so that here in the notebook, our human eyes can read it a little bit easier. So I default to using display for things because it's going to give us a better notebook experience here. Keep a number as a string could use less memory than the number itself. Depends on what you're going to do with that later. Otherwise, then you're casting it back and forth out of string into a number so you can actually work with it. Could I use a list of type var? Is that impossible? You would do a list of type object instead. for banana crazy there. .NET is so much easier than Java. Well, thank you. No, this is not Java. No, Satoshi. You're watching a show called C# with CSharpFritz. It's C#. Was the keyboard shortcut I am using on Visual Studio Code? I'm not using any keyboard shortcuts. Control-Enter will execute the code. There is also a run button here. There's a run button over there. But Control-Enter will run the code that I'm typing. Does C# have generic type references like Java? Yes, Java actually was inspired by the .NET generics back in 2008. Continuing on. Reading. Have I updated a video on building Jupyter notebooks? Jupyter notebooks are a series of Markdown mixed with code. So I can click edit on these and you'll see I have Markdown there and appropriate syntax for creating these. I could probably put together a 5-10 minute video about creating these. What I need to spend time learning is how to engage Plotly and how to build charts in here, because I think those are extremely valuable. Which do I prefer, Basic Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code? It depends on what I'm doing, honestly. I can go back and forth. Do I have a YouTube channel where I teach C# for newbies like me? How you doing? You're watching it. This series started about a year ago. Check out the C# with CSharpFritz playlist on the .NET channel. It's hidden, it's buried way down on the playlists. It's probably about a page or two down. But if you go in there, there's about 50 videos that you can find with me teaching C# here live on YouTube. I'm also over on Twitch 3 days a week, spending several hours talking through and building applications and what those various things mean. And I'm much more open about AMA, Ask Me Anything interactions over there. What's the difference between collections and list? We'll talk about collections another time. It's a little bit further than I want to go today, and I've only got about a half hour left. And I'm only this far on the scroll bar. There's a lot more down below we got to get to. So, real literals. We can declare types of double, float, and decimal types with simple numeric notation, but we need to force the literal numbers that we assign to be the correct type to match the variable type expected. To do this, we add a D, F, or M suffix to the number being assigned. So D will get you a double, F becomes a float, M becomes a decimal. So we can I should have included some code right after that. Let's put some code in here. Let's put some code. Oh no, it is right there. I thought. Don't mind me. So var my number equals 4m. When I say get that type, it becomes a decimal. So real easy to see how you set those appropriately. Hey, Screech Rat. Typecasting. So if we want to cast types, we want to take things from one variable type and put it into another variable type, we can declare things like int value a equals 10, and we can coerce it. We can implicitly convert it by saying, well, decimal value b equals value a. Display value b, it comes out as 10. And if we put get type around that, right, you'll see that 10 is a decimal, okay? It went from being an integer, it was forced into a decimal type here, and it became a decimal. Now, Value C, if we say put that into a decimal, we start it with the value 10, we can then force it into an integer type by using an explicit cast. We can't do an implicit conversion like this because you can't implicitly convert from a decimal to an integer. It doesn't know what to do with the leftovers, with the stuff to the right of the decimal place. We're going to lose precision. So you can't do that. Okay? You have to explicitly say, yes, convert that value. And we do that by placing the type we want to convert, we want to cast the value C to in front of it, and we put that inside parentheses, and that will then cast, it will convert value C into value D, and we can display it. And there's value D. Let's make value D something different so it's a little bit easier to see. Let's make that 20. So we can see now 20. Okay? Taking a look back at chat. Is it a bad practice to define implicit and explicit operator functions? No, not at all. Okay, moving on. Now that we have some basic types and we can create variables, let's interact with them using operators. So we'll start by declaring two variables here, apples and oranges. Apples, we're going to create a decimal value that's 100 apples. We'll create 30 decimal value for oranges. And we can do basic arithmetic operations by using plus, minus. You can see the values being output here. Multiply. And I'm not going to get into division just yet because it's a little bit trickier. You can use the equals operator to assign values and prefix it with an arithmetic operator to identify and to modify and assign that value. So I can say apples plus equals 10 will take the value for apples, which was what, 200? Add 10 to 10 and assign it back into apples. And then we can take 10 off of and assign it back in. And you can see the values. It was 100, my bad. Display, we can do the same thing. Star equals, and we can multiply. We can divide and set equal. And we can also do this, of course, with a double equals to test equality. So 30.0 as a double, is that equal to the integer 30? True. So now, right, because I explicitly said 30.0 and 30 as an integer, they are the same value. They are equal. C# makes inequality of operators available as well. And a test using the double equals. You saw the double equals, so greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, and you can see those interacting here. I'll let you tinker with them on your own. We can also have a not equals by using exclamation point equals, and that'll get you, well, are these not equal? And, well, that exists now. Really? Are you sure? There it is. There we go. True. They are not equal. All right. So, and division is a little bit tricky because you need to divide by if you don't divide by a more precise type like a double or a decimal or a float, you won't get the remainders. I should put a decimal sample in here. Let's create a decimal sample real quick. Display apples, divide by, and let's divide by, like, let's say 7. Okay. So by saying 7M, that turns it into a decimal, and I get a funny looking decimal output. If I don't put the M on there, right, and I run it, that wasn't what I expected. That wasn't what I expected. I expected it to round it on me, and it didn't. Well, oh no, wait. That is a decimal. Because the numerator is a decimal, it returned the full value. Okay. If I change this to an int, yeah, now it gets rounded on me. So if you divide integers, long integers, bytes, these whole number data types, if you divide them, they will get rounded, even if this is a decimal. No, one of them has to be a decimal. I'm sorry. And then we'll get the full number there. No. There we go. All right. Moving on. Data types. Date types. Let me take a look at chat real quick. I've got about a half an hour to go in the session. How do I know when I'm working with C#? Haha. Feel free to ask questions. Yes, that's right. What does M mean on that decimal? It forces it to a decimal type. Yes, decimal literal. D, M, and F. Yes. Cool. Moving on. So date types. And I'm going to work with the date time type. When a date is obviously a lot more complex than just a numeric value, right? It turns into a point in time. So you can use the date time type to reference and specify a point in time. Now, I want to caution, because there are several different interpretations and values that come into play when we start talking about date and time, because what you specify as a date and time is going to be different from what I specify as a date and time. Example, I can specify a date time like this, which is creating a new date time with the year 2020, the month 8 August, the first day of the month, so this is August 1st, 2020, the 9th hour, the 15th minute, the 30th second. So we've specified this time. That's fine. That's what time it is for me here in Philadelphia. If you are in Seattle or London or Prague or Johannesburg or Berlin or St. Petersburg or Beijing or Sydney or Melbourne, that's a different value. This does not carry time zone specific information with it. This data type only contains that information. Now, you can put a kind with it to specify, well, this is UTC time, or this is a local time, and it'll help you in working with it. It is the local time for this machine. It'll help you working with that, but it doesn't necessarily carry time zone information. We have a different type for that will allow you to carry not even time zone information, but offset from UTC information, which could then be one of several different time zones. When we start to get into the concepts around time zones, daylight savings or summertime, as it's sometimes referred to, things with that date and time math get a little bit funny. Daylight savings here in the States typically changes at 2 in the morning. And we change over from daylight savings or summertime to standard time or winter time in the fall. And we fall back. We set our clocks back an hour. So 2 in the morning actually occurs twice. How is that? What do we do with that? Weird things happen with that. There are other libraries that handle those types of interactions, those values, and managing and interacting with those values very, very well. And I would recommend you check out the Noda time package from John Skeet. if you need to do some of those types of interactions. But storing a date and time and doing some simple interactions with it, referencing how many months between, how many days between, date time is very good for this, very small, and will give you those types of interactions quite nicely. So we can interact with our date time by, we can display that value that we stored. We can get properties off of it like hour, minute, and second, and we can output them here. Okay, not bad. We can format it different ways as well, but that's the basics with setting up the date time. And we can go and interact with the actual date time object itself by referencing these properties on the datetime object. Datetime now will give you what time it is now on this machine. This machine says right now it's 10:37 on August 9th. It also has the ability to give you the maximum value of a date, which is the year 9,999 at just about to turn over to midnight on December 31st. And you can get the min value as well from the year, well, January 1st at midnight on the year 1. So plenty of room there for you to interact with dates for your typical business operations. And we can add durations. Hey, stop that. Go back there. Oh, I was trying to highlight. There we go. We can add durations to our date, like days and hours, to do some date interactions. And we'll create what's called a time span type to define that time duration to interact with. So I can say today, add days, and add a week to, well, did I define today up here? Yeah. Today is defined up here as August 1st, 2020. So down here, if I say add days to that, it shows me August 8th because I'm adding days to it. Now I specify a time span like this. Time span from hours. There's also other methods you can use to define time spans, but time span from hours. So this is going to give me a time span. I named it 3 hours, and it's going to be 3 hours. So when I display that, you see I get this syntax. You're not going to let me highlight that easily. 030000, so that it looks like just that time. And now if I take today and add 3 hours, well, today I set to August 1st, 2020, and it was 9:15. Well, now it's, where'd it go? There it is, 12:15. So I'm adding to it. You can do all kinds of things with that. You can even subtract. You can add negative time spans. There's a lot of capabilities there for you. Date and time, we've legally turned into an extremely complex problem. And it's going to get even more complex as more states in the United States abolish the concepts of daylight savings or summertime. So it's going to get very, very complex. Scrolling down, taking a look at chat. So if only we lived on a flat Earth. What about date only and time only types? Those were just recently introduced. I wasn't going to get into them today, but they are available if you want to specify just the date part, just the time part. Scrolling down here, we can also start working with, I mentioned there's a kind to, and I didn't put in, yeah, here we go. Date time carries a kind property to show you if it's local time or referencing a UTC time. So if I say this date equals and I specify a full date here, so 2021 August 10th at 10 a.m. and I say display this date dot kind, well, you didn't specify a type for this, so I don't know what it is. It's an unspecified type. even if I say, well, give me UTC now, give me the current time in universal coordinated time, it's still unspecified. That seems weird because you requested UTC now. It's true. And kind is a read-only property. You can't go back in there and after it's been reported, stuff a kind value in there. It doesn't work like that. So what you can do is you can pass in the date-time kind when you create the date object. And it'll report to you what it is. And what that means then is you can then say to local time, and it will properly convert my time zone if UTC, right, to get back to my time zone for this PC means I need to subtract 4 hours. I am 4 hours to the west of UTC. So it's going to take that 10:30 in the morning and turn it into 6:30. But when I say to universal time, because this is UTC time, it doesn't do anything for it and it just outputs normally. So it's a way for you to get an assurance and a standardization in the simple date time type to interact with. Now there is another type, I mentioned date time offset, that's available that you can pass in. You can initialize it, not with, well, here's the kind, but with your time zone offset from UTC. So I would pass in -4 hours, and that'll work for me in US Eastern time zone. It'll also work for some folks in Canada. It'll work for some folks in South America as well, and that's okay. Those are different time zones that have different behaviors, but observe the same UTC offset. Well, which one is it? Do we really care which one it is? Depends. So, all kinds of things that you need to juggle and understand there and manage when we're dealing with dates that get well beyond the simple, let's just get started with passing some date information around. Okay. All right. Tuples. Tuples were recently added as of C# 7. This is available in all of the .NETs, all of the modern .NETs, .NET Framework, .NET Core, and .NET 5 and 6. But you can work with a tuple, which is, you'll hear some folks refer to it as a tuple. Tuple looks like double, so I use the same tuple, the same U to pronounce it. So a tuple can be used to group together related data points in a lightweight structure. You put parentheses around the definition of that type to confirm. So I can define a point and say this is two integers, int, and I get 2,3 is how I will specify this. And now here's back to using display versus console write line. I say display point, and it tells me 2 and 3 are my item 1 and item 2 properties of the point tuple. Now, what's item 1, item 2? Well, those are properties that are generated for you that allow you to reference the object, the variables, the component variables of that tuple from left to right. So item 1 is the first integer. Item 2 is the second integer, and so on and so forth. I'm using 2 here, but you could certainly create this very wide with a significant number of components to it. I'm not sure how wide you can make it, but there comes a point where this loses value and becomes overly complex by adding too many values to it. So if I refer to these as item 1, item 2, I get 2 and 3 being returned, which clearly match up to here and that nice display that we had there. But what if I don't want to call it item? Item is kind of generic, it's kind of plain, and quite frankly, if I want to communicate to another programmer, to another developer, what the intent of these two values are, how do I do that? How do I get them to be reported? Oh, and just to make sure you know, I can change this to var, and it still works. Okay? So, right? Come on now. There it is. There we go. So it's up to you how you want to declare these, but if you want to put some more intent with the various components in the tuple, you can give them names. So if I want to create a tuple called Philadelphia, and I want to have latitude and longitude as a pair of decimals here. Now, to our human eyes, to our interactions with coordinates on a map or on the globe, when you see two decimal numbers like this, that kind of makes sense. You know that these are latitude and longitude. But if you want to be explicit about it, you want to make it easier to read and interact with them when you're writing your code, you can give them names, and you specify the name after the type separated by a comma. And then when I say display here, it still gives me item 1, item 2. Item 1 and item 2 properties are still there and still let you interact with these, but I can also reference dot latitude and dot longitude. And Visual Studio Code is going to give me IntelliSense here, and it will inside your code, not just in a notebook, so that you can see what these things are. Okay? And I mentioned about item 1, item 2. They're not in the list of properties and methods that you can interact with, but I can use item 1 and it reports the same thing. What did I do? There we go. Okay. So you can define and you can work with tuples to give you a little bit more structure to the variables and the types that you're interacting with, so you can pass them along. Now, in my personal experience, and I'm going to come to the chat room and we're going to talk through all your questions to wrap things up here in just a minute. In my experience, I like to use tuples when I'm sketching out, when I'm prototyping some code, and I don't quite know the shape of things that I want to pass around and interact with. For me, this is a very temporary way that I write code, just so I get a little bit of structure to pass things along. And when I figure out that this is the way that I want my code to be structured, I'll then go and create some more complex types called either a struct or a class. And those types and how we interact with structs and classes is our topic for next week. Let me head back over to the main screen over here, and let's talk through, in the final 10 minutes we have here together, let's talk through some more of your questions. Let's get to some answering of more of what's going on in your mind around what we learned here today. Let me head back over. There I am. Hello. Oh my goodness. I stepped forward a little bit. All right. When would be a time to use a tuple? Yeah, I covered that briefly. Curious Drive loves tuples. Fantastic. Let me see here. Scrolling down. When I was studying SQL, DBA said to me, stop saying tuple because it sounds like cursing. Asked you to say row or record. That's fair. And let me go back here to the city because for some reason it's not popping up there. It's like a C++ struct. A little bit. C# has a struct, and it's I think more akin to what you're thinking of. When you want to return multiple values from a method, then it's kind of a big overhead to create a class for it, for example. Yes, Nikolai. Very good point. You want to return some values from a method, from an interaction, multiple values. You don't want to go create another class. Go ahead and use a tuple. Absolutely. That's a good place. Item 1 is a reserved word for $1, $2. It's a reserved one to reference the properties in that position on a tuple. In other data types, records, classes, structs, you can use item 1 to item 2 without problem. C# tuples are not immutable. That's correct. For immutability, C# has record types. That's correct. I'm suddenly bigger. Yes, that's right. I'm back here, back at the desk. Was I running the code samples in a Jupyter notebook? Yes, you can click through the repository. There should be a link just below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're on Twitch, I will post... Actually, if you're on either platform, I will post... There's a link to the GitHub repository, which has all the notebooks, and a link to open them in Binder. If you'd like, you can run them locally, and run them in Visual Studio Code if you'd like. Yes, value tuples are structs, for those of you that are familiar with structs. So all value types, which means that they'll get reclaimed by the garbage collector very quickly. What laptop do I use? So that was a Surface Book 2 that I was using. I also have a laptop from a company called K-Focus that runs the Kubuntu operating system, and it has a GeForce 2700 in it, and 64 gig of RAM and a terabyte of drive space. Really a great machine for running Linux-based workloads on there, and I do a lot of .NET development on that laptop. But I bounce back and forth between them. I also have a MacBook Air from 2015 that's showing its age, and I need to look at a new Mac soon. You can use 2 different data types in tuples. That's correct, Andrea. So I was passing just integers or just decimals in there, but you can mix and match different variable types in there, so that you can maybe you want to put a label with a decimal or something like that. You certainly can do that. All right. Wow. I am about 5 minutes early. How we doing there, chat room? What do you think? We got through a lot today. Honestly, these initial topics for C#, there's things in there that are always a reminder, because, I mean, Crumbs, you saw me with the division. This isn't something that you think of every day. The basics of how do the variables fit together? How do they interoperate? So it's kind of important. It's kind of a good thing to go back and remember some of these things, because it may help you in the days and weeks ahead when you get into your next programming project. All right. Why are so many .NET developers using Macs at conferences? They may be using Macs because they want to be able to compile for iOS. They may be using Macs because they want a more Linux-like operating system, and quite frankly, carrying a Mac laptop is like a piece of developer jewelry. There's a status that comes with carrying a Mac that you just don't have carrying a Dell or an HP. So there's other machines and things out there you'll see folks carry, but productivity-wise, you're not any more productive on a Mac than you are on a Windows machine. It for most folks that are carrying it, it's strictly developer jewelry, and showing that they can spend the money to pick one up. You never found a review of these topics useless? Oh, thank you, Serge Dev over on Twitch. Appreciate that. Good refresher of the basics. So that M1 chip, you like the M1 chip? There's still some things being ironed out. You'll see with developers and developer tools on the M1 chip. Just not quite there yet. Eggsy carries a Mac for personal reference. There you go. See? And many of the folks that are doing .NET development on a Mac, they're running Windows in parallels. Yeah. Mac battery lasts a bit longer. Okay, that's a good answer. It was worth the price. Okay. If you're enjoying development on it, then it's worth it for you. But for many, it's developer jewelry. All developers have Dell Precision machines. In Nikolai's experience, and wondered why you would use a Mac for .NET. Yeah, they put stuff. They'll put stuff down in parallel so they can run Windows there. Frackberg is a Linux admin. It's easier to use a Mac than a Windows box. Have you tried WSL2, Windows Subsystem for Linux? You might have a better experience there. Honestly, I really enjoy using the K-Focus, so I have Linux on the metal, and I don't have to worry about any of that. Seth says, as a C# teacher, appreciate hearing how others you explain the intro. Oh, well, thank you, Seth. I hope you have a fantastic day, and best of luck with your classes that you might be teaching. All right. We are wrapping up here. I have just a few minutes left, and I'll stick for any more questions. And we're going to get ready for... what did I do here? Did I move the thing? I moved the thing. I need to get ready for a raid over on Twitch. We're going to get ready to and we'll wrap things up.
Billy.
Hey, why? Goodbye, Billy. I didn't need your commercial right now. Thank you. And I didn't see any messages coming in on... Nope, nothing on Pubble and Learn TV at all. Eggsy says, WSL2 is pretty slick. Want to stay with Linux GUI apps. I want to play with Linux GUI apps on Windows 11. That should be a very, very interesting topic when that lands. Thank you so much to everybody who's following over there on the Twitch Visual Studio channel. Lots of stuff that you're going to be able to see there. Of course, we're on YouTube, youtube.com/.net. So you can find out all kinds of stuff from the .NET team, from the Visual Studio teams, as we're building and making more of your development experience. Huge thanks to everybody coming in here. Your work Dell may have accidentally upgraded to Windows 11. Oh, Eggsy, I'm so sorry to hear that it accidentally upgraded. You can't accidentally upgrade. That's not a thing. You have to opt in and explicitly do the upgrade. So, Medusa, what do you mean? So, all right. Let's wrap this up. Let's call it at the end of the day. Thank you so much, all of you that are watching out on Learn TV. You've got more great content coming for you right after this break. Let me wrap up over there, and there we go. Those of you that are watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Check out all the great videos in this series. Playlist is C# with CSharpFritz. Thank you again for tuning in over on YouTube. But if you're watching us over on the big Twitch TV network, I hope you join me. You stick around as we set up for a raid. We're going to connect in. We're going to go find another channel on the big Twitch TV network. Get you connected. Get you seeing what else is going on out there, because there's always great content for developers on Twitch. And I am going to head down into the science and technology categories here and get you connected with... My goodness. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't see folks out there broadcasting right now. Too many folks. I'm going to get you connected over to go see Lana Lux. She's broadcasting. She's doing some game development with Unity and C#. She's building some models there for her games that she's been working on. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow over on my channel on Twitch, twitch.tv/csharpfritz. You'll find me over there. We're going to be talking about Blazor development. We're working on a Kubernetes cluster for my Raspberry Pi tower that I've built, and more. We're building with Blazor, deploying to Azure. It's going to be a lot of fun. I hope to see you tomorrow, same time, over on Twitch TV, CSharpFritz. I'll be back here next week. We'll be talking about classes and various types, methods, and properties as we build more with C#. Get ready to say hi to my friend Lano Lux, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.